The envelope trembled in David Hayes' weathered hands as the audience of millions fell silent. Tears welled in his eyes as he stood on the gleaming stage of the National Documentary Awards. Beside him, Sophia Reid squeezed his calloused palm reassuringly, the same hand that had reached out to help her on that dusty rural road just 18 months ago. Neither the struggling farmer nor the determined filmmaker could have imagined that a simple act of kindness would lead them here, about to open an envelope that could change everything. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The summer heat pressed down on Willow Creek like a heavy blanket. David Hayes wiped sweat from his brow with a handkerchief that had seen better days, much like his pickup truck, which groaned in protest as he navigated the rutted dirt road leading away from the bank. The meeting hadn't gone well. Third time this year they denied his loan application, each rejection more painful than the last. The drought had stretched into its second year, strangling his crops and his hopes along with them. 6 generations, he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the truck's laboring engine. 6 generations of Hayes men working this land, and I'm the one who's going to lose it. He glanced at the dashboard, where a faded photograph was tucked beside the speedometer. His father stood proudly in front of golden wheat fields that seemed to stretch to the horizon. David could almost smell the rich earth from that long-ago day, could almost feel his father's firm hand on his small shoulder as he explained that someday all this would be his responsibility. The bank manager's words echoed in his mind. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes, but your farm simply isn't viable anymore. Have you considered selling? There are developers who would pay good money for that acreage." The suggestion had felt like a physical blow. Sell the land? Might as well ask him to sell his soul. Lost in thought, David almost missed the figure on the roadside, a thumb extended hopefully. He rarely picked up hitchhikers, but something about the solitary form standing in the shimmering heat made him ease off the accelerator. Perhaps it was simply that he recognized desperation when he saw it. As the truck slowed, he got a better look. A woman in her early 30s, dressed practically in jeans and a light button-down shirt, a well-worn backpack at her feet. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and large sunglasses covered much of her face. She didn't look threatening, just tired and hot. David rolled down the passenger window, wincing as the crank made that familiar sticking sound. "Where you headed?" he called. "Wherever you're going is fine," she replied, her voice clear and direct. "I'm just trying to get away from the middle of nowhere." Despite himself, David chuckled. "Well, I hate to break it to you, but I'm headed deeper into the middle of nowhere. Willow Creek's about 20 miles that way." He gestured vaguely behind her. She adjusted her backpack on her shoulder. "Willow Creek works for me. I've been trying to get there, actually." David reached across and pushed open the passenger door. "Hop in, then. It's not exactly air-conditioned luxury, but it beats walking in this heat." The woman tossed her backpack behind the seat and climbed in. Up close, she looked even more exhausted than he'd first thought. There were smudges of dirt on her face and a determined set to her jaw. "I'm David," he said, pulling back onto the empty road. "Sophia," she replied, extending a hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "Thanks for stopping. Not everyone would." "Where are you coming from?" David asked, more out of politeness than curiosity. His mind was still preoccupied with figures and foreclosures. "New York originally, but today, I've been walking from the bus stop in Riverdale since early morning. The connection to Willow Creek never showed." David nodded. "Rural transport's not what it used to be. Nothing around here is." He couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Sophia studied him for a moment, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a bottle of water. She offered it to him first, but he shook his head. "You mind if I ask what brings you to Willow Creek? We don't get many visitors, especially ones who arrive by bus and hitchhiking." Sophia took a long drink before answering. "I'm working on a project, documentary film, rural America, the changing landscape, that sort of thing." David's eyebrows rose. "Documentary? Like for television?" "More for festivals initially, but who knows? The right story can find its way to millions of viewers these days." She turned to face him more directly. "What about you? You look like you've had a rough day." David hesitated. He wasn't the type to share his troubles with strangers, especially not city folks who probably thought of farms as quaint relics of a bygone era. But there was something about Sophia's direct gaze that invited confidence. "Just came from the bank," he said finally. "Third loan rejection this year. Turns out banks aren't too interested in financing farms during a drought." "Your farm?" she asked. "Hayes Family Farm. Been in my family for 6 generations. Started as 100 acres back in my great-great-great-grandfather's day. He was a Civil War veteran who came west looking for a fresh start." David surprised himself with how easily the words flowed. "It's grown since then. At least, it had been growing. Now I'm just trying to hold on to what's left." Sophia nodded slowly. 6 generations. That's remarkable. "We'll make it to 7 at this rate," David said, his eyes fixed on the dusty road ahead. "My daughter Lily, she's off at college now. Agricultural science. Always thought she'd come back, take over someday. Now I'm just hoping there's something left for her to come back to." They drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rumble of the truck's engine and the occasional clink of something loose in the undercarriage. The landscape rolled by. Fields that should have been lush with corn or wheat, now dusty and barren. "What happens next?" Sophia asked quietly. "After the bank says no?" David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You keep going. What else can you do? I've got 40 acres of corn that needs a miracle, 30 of soybeans that aren't much better, and a small apple orchard that's hanging on by a thread, plus the animals. Can't exactly abandon them because the numbers don't add up." "Animals?" "Dairy cows mostly. A few chickens, 2 old horses that are more pets than anything useful at this point." A faint smile touched his lips. "My daughter's 4-H projects. She couldn't bear to part with them when she left for school." They crested a small hill, and David's farm came into view in the distance. Even in the drought, there was something undeniably beautiful about the place. The white farmhouse needed paint, and the red barn's roof had seen better days, but they stood proudly against the backdrop of golden fields and blue sky. "That's it," David said, a note of undisguised pride in his voice despite everything. "Hayes Family Farm." Sophia leaned forward, looking at the property with keen interest. "It's beautiful." "It's struggling," David corrected, though he appreciated her words. "But yes, on a good day, in the right light, it's the most beautiful place in the world." He turned down the long driveway, dust billowing behind the truck. As they approached the house, a border collie came bounding out to greet them, barking enthusiastically. "That's Max," David said. "Best cattle dog in the county." He parked near the house and turned to Sophia. "So, Willow Creek's still about 10 miles that way." He pointed down the road. "Not much traffic out this way, though. You might be waiting a while for another ride." Sophia looked thoughtful. "Actually, I was hoping to talk to some local farmers for my documentary. Would you be willing to answer a few questions? I can pay for your time." David's pride bristled at the offer of payment, but his bank account whispered that he wasn't in a position to refuse. Still, he hesitated. "What kind of questions?" "Just about your experience, the challenges you're facing, the history of the place, the human side of farming that most people never see." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, professional-looking camera. "I'd record it, of course, with your permission." David ran a hand through his hair, suddenly self-conscious about his appearance. He hadn't shaved in a couple of days, and his clothes were dusty from the fields. "I don't know. I'm not really the type for cameras and interviews." "That's exactly why I want to talk to you," Sophia said earnestly. "I'm tired of staged, polished stories. I want something real. And from the little you've told me, your story deserves to be heard." Before David could respond, his phone rang. He fished it from his pocket and checked the screen. "Sorry, I need to take this. It's my daughter," he answered, turning slightly away from Sophia. "Hey, Lily girl, everything okay?" As he listened to his daughter's voice, his expression shifted from concern to something more complicated. No, don't worry about that. Focus on your exams." "Yes, I'm sure." "The bank?" "Oh, they're just taking their time with the paperwork, that's all." The lie came easily. Practiced. Everything's fine here. Max misses you though. And those horses of yours are eating me out of house and home. Sophia watched him, her expression thoughtful. She could see the tension in his shoulders, hear the forced lightness in his tone. This was a man carrying a heavy burden alone, protecting his child from worries she couldn't solve from hundreds of miles away. Love you too, sweetheart. Study hard. David ended the call and pocketed the phone, his face carefully composed. Your daughter doesn't know about the bank? Sophia asked quietly. David shook his head. She's got enough on her plate with finals coming up. No point worrying her when there's nothing she can do. Does she want to take over the farm someday? A genuine smile broke across David's face. Since she was knee-high to a grasshopper, used to follow me around in these tiny overalls, helping with chores. More hindrance than help back then, but she learned fast. By 12, she could drive a tractor better than half the grown men in the county. By 16, she was keeping the books, suggesting crop rotations. She's got a mind for the science of it all, not just the tradition. Sophia nodded, then gestured to her camera. That's exactly the kind of story I want to tell. Not just about the hardships, but about the passion, the continuity, the future. Will you let me interview you, David? Just a conversation. If you don't like it, I'll delete the whole thing right in front of you. David looked at the farm around him, at the land that had been in his family for generations. Maybe this was a chance to document it, at least, before it all slipped away. And if he was honest with himself, there was something appealing about the idea that someone wanted to hear his story, that someone thought it mattered. All right, he said finally. But I need to check on the animals first. And I'm not changing my clothes or anything for your camera. Sophia's face lit up with a smile. I wouldn't want you to. The real David Hayes is exactly who I want to talk to. As David led her toward the barn, neither of them could have predicted how this simple interview would spiral into something far beyond either of their expectations. The story of Hayes Family Farm was about to reach far beyond the boundaries of Willow Creek, touching lives they couldn't imagine and setting in motion events that would change everything. The afternoon sun slanted through the gaps in the barn's weathered boards, painting golden stripes across the hay-strewn floor. David moved with practiced efficiency, checking on each animal, measuring feed, examining a cow's injured leg with gentle hands. Sophia followed, her camera occasionally capturing moments without intruding. You really care about them, she observed as David scratched behind the ears of an elderly horse who had nickered softly at his approach. They depend on me, he said simply. That's not something I take lightly. When the chores were done, they settled on the farmhouse porch. The wooden swing creaked rhythmically as David rocked it gently with one foot. He'd brought out 2 glasses of iced tea, the kind of hospitality ingrained in him since childhood. Sophia set up her camera on a small tripod, adjusted some settings, and took a seat across from him in a wicker chair that had been weathered by countless seasons on the porch. Just forget the camera is there, she advised. This isn't a formal interview. It's a conversation. David nodded, though he still felt uncomfortable with the lens pointed at him. Where do we start? At the beginning is usually good, Sophia said with a smile. Tell me about the first Hayes to farm this land. David took a sip of his tea and leaned back in the swing. The story of his family's farm was one he knew by heart, passed down through generations like an oral history. Jacob Hayes came here in 1866, he began, his voice finding its rhythm in the familiar tale. He'd fought for the Union, seen things no man should see at Antietam and Gettysburg, wanted peace after that, and space. He found both here. As David spoke, the tension gradually left his shoulders. He described how Jacob had built the original farmhouse with his own hands, how his son had expanded the acreage during the boom years, and how subsequent generations had weathered the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, and countless other challenges. My grandfather used to say farming is an act of faith, David mused. You put seeds in the ground, and trust they'll grow. You raise animals from birth, and trust they'll thrive. You work through drought and flood, and hope that next season will be better. And your father? And your father, Sophia prompted gently. What did he teach you about farming? A shadow crossed David's face. My father was the most stubborn man I ever knew. Refused to modernize for years. Insisted on doing things the way his father had done them. We butted heads constantly when I came back from agricultural college with new ideas. He glanced at the photograph on the wall, showing a stern-faced man standing proudly beside a much younger David. He died 7 years ago. Heart attack, right out there in the North Field. By then, we'd made our peace. He'd even admitted that some of my newfangled ideas had merit. David rubbed his chin, remembering. The last thing he ever said to me was, "This land doesn't belong to us, son. We belong to it. We're just taking care of it for those who come after." I think about that every day. Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. And now you're afraid there won't be anything left for Lily to inherit. It wasn't a question, but David answered anyway. 2 years of drought, grain prices falling, equipment breaking down, and now the banks won't extend any more credit. He sighed heavily. I've tried everything. Diversifying crops, farmers markets for the apples, even took on carpentry jobs in town last winter. Nothing's enough to stop the bleeding. What about government assistance? Agricultural subsidies? David's expression hardened slightly. Applied for everything I qualify for. It helps, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed. And I'm not looking for handouts. I just want a fair chance to keep this farm alive. What would that look like? A fair chance? The question made David pause. He'd been so focused on immediate survival that he hadn't allowed himself to think about what might actually save the farm in the long term. Water, for one thing, he said finally. The irrigation system needs an overhaul. With climate change, these droughts aren't going away. But that's a $100,000 investment minimum. He warmed to the topic, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. The dairy operation could be modernized too. Not going industrial scale, but enough to increase production without sacrificing quality. The apple orchard could be expanded. There's growing demand for organic, locally grown produce. Lily's been researching heritage varieties that might be more resistant to changing conditions. End quote. Sophia leaned forward, clearly engaged. It sounds like you have the vision, just not the capital. Story of farming in America, David said with a rueful smile. The know-how's there. The willingness to work is there. The money isn't. As they continued talking, the sun began to set, bathing the farm in soft golden light. David realized with surprise that they'd been conversing for hours. Sophia had drawn him out effortlessly, asking insightful questions that made him think about his life and work in ways he hadn't considered before. I should probably find somewhere to stay in town, Sophia said eventually, checking her watch. Is there a motel in Willow Creek? David hesitated. There's the Willow Creek Inn, but it's not much, and it's a long walk from here. He glanced at the darkening sky. We have a spare room. It's simple, but you're welcome to it for the night. Least I can do after you listen to an old farmer ramble on all afternoon. Sophia's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. It's no imposition. Farm this size, we've always kept a room ready for seasonal workers or visitors. He stood up, stretching his back. Besides, if you're serious about documenting life here, you might as well see what mornings are like on a farm, warning though they start early. I'd like that, Sophia said, smiling as she turned off her camera. Thank you. That evening, over a simple dinner of beef stew that David had pulled from the freezer, Lily makes a batch every time she's home, claims she can't trust me to feed myself properly. Sophia asked about the community of Willow Creek. David painted a picture of a town in transition, caught between its agricultural roots and an uncertain future. When I was growing up, you couldn't find a parking spot on Main Street on Saturdays. The feed store, the diner, the general store all packed. Now half the storefronts are empty. Young people leave for college and don't come back. Can't blame them. There aren't many opportunities here anymore. What about your neighbors? Other farmers? David stared into his stew for a moment. The Andersons sold to a corporate farm 3 years ago. The Wilsons last year. The Bradleys are hanging on by a thread, just like me. Each year, there are fewer of us independent farmers left. And the corporate farms? Are they thriving? David's expression darkened. Oh, they're doing just fine. They have the capital to weather bad years, to invest in the latest technology. They can operate at a loss for a while if needed, subsidized by parent companies with diverse interests. They're changing the landscape, literally and figuratively. Monoculture crops as far as the eye can see, heavy pesticide use, minimal labor forces. He shook his head. It's efficient, I'll give them that. But it's not sustainable. Not for the soil, not for the local economy, not for food security in the long run. We're losing something important with every family farm that goes under. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly the story I'm trying to tell. Not just the economic aspects, but the human cost, the cultural loss. Well, you came to the right place, David said with a wry smile. You're witnessing the endangered species of American farming in its natural habitat. The next morning, true to his word, David woke before dawn. To his surprise, Sophia was already up, camera in hand, ready to follow him through his morning routine. She recorded as he milked the cows, fed the chickens, and checked the irrigation system in the fields. The drought's getting worse, he explained, crumbling the dry soil between his fingers. See how it just turns to dust? No moisture content at all. Later, as they walked the boundaries of the apple orchard, David pointed out the irrigation challenges. The water table's dropping. My grandfather's wells never ran dry, not even in the worst years. Now I'm having to dig deeper every season. Sophia recorded everything, occasionally asking questions, but mostly letting David explain his world in his own words. There was something cathartic about it for him, articulating the challenges he faced daily, giving voice to concerns that usually remained unspoken. By mid-morning, they had returned to the house. David checked his phone and frowned. I've got to go into town for some parts. The tractor's acting up again. You're welcome to come along. See Willow Creek for yourself. Sophia readily agreed. As they drove into town, David pointed out landmarks and shared anecdotes about the area's history. Willow Creek itself was a small town that had seen better days. The main street featured a mix of occupied businesses and empty storefronts, with, for lease signs gathering dust in the windows. They stopped first at Henderson's Farm Supply, where David was greeted by name. The owner, an older man with a weathered face, looked curiously at Sophia, but didn't ask questions as David explained the parts he needed. Put it on my account, Joe, David said, gathering the items. You sure about that, David? Joe asked quietly. Your tab's getting up there. David stiffened slightly. I'll clear it when the harvest comes in. Joe nodded, though his expression suggested doubt. Whatever you say. You know I'm flexible. He turned to Sophia with a forced smile. You visiting our little town, miss? Just passing through, Sophia replied, working on a documentary about rural communities. Joe's eyebrows rose. A documentary? About Willow Creek? Well, there's not much to see these days, I'm afraid. Town's not what it used to be. That's part of what I'm documenting, Sophia said. The changes in rural America, the challenges facing farming communities. Joe nodded vigorously. Well, you've certainly come to the right place for that. Whole way of life, disappearing right before our eyes. He gestured around the store. My father opened this place in 1952. Did good business for decades. Now I'm barely hanging on. Can't compete with the big box stores in the city. Can't afford to modernize. David shifted uncomfortably. Joe's been threatening to retire for 15 years now. And I mean it more every year, Joe retorted good-naturedly. Just waiting for someone to make an offer on the building. Not that anyone's lining up to buy commercial property in Willow Creek these days. As they left the store, Sophia asked, Is that typical? Businesses struggling alongside the farms? David nodded. It's all connected. When farms fail, the businesses that support them suffer. When those businesses close, more people leave town looking for work. It's a downward spiral that's hard to reverse. They walked down Main Street, David occasionally greeting people by name. They stopped for lunch at the Willow Creek Diner, a classic small-town establishment with checkered tablecloths and a menu that hadn't changed much in decades. The waitress, A woman in her 50s named Martha knew David well. "The usual David?" she asked, pouring coffee without waiting for a response. "Thanks, Martha. This is Sophia. She's making a documentary about farming communities." Martha's eyes lit up with interest. "Really? Will it be on television?" "Possibly," Sophia replied. "I'm focusing on the challenges facing family farms and small towns like Willow Creek." "Well, we've got challenges aplenty," Martha said with a rueful laugh. "My husband lost his job when the lumber mill closed 5 years ago. Had to retire early. Now our son and his wife are talking about moving to Indianapolis. Can't say I blame them. Not much future here for young people." As Martha walked away to place their orders, Sophia looked around the half-empty diner. "It seems like everyone has a similar story." "Because we do," David said simply. "It's not just my farm or Joe's store or this diner. It's happening all across rural America. Communities that thrived for generations are disappearing. And once they're gone, they don't come back." Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. David asked about Sophia's background, and she told him about growing up in New York, studying film at NYU, and her determination to tell stories that mainstream media overlooked. "My previous documentaries were more urban-focused," she explained. "Gentrification in Brooklyn, the housing crisis in Chicago. But I realized I was missing a huge part of the American experience by staying in cities. There are struggles happening in rural areas that most urban dwellers never even think about." "Well, you're certainly getting an unvarnished look at it," David said, gesturing around the diner. "This is Willow Creek in 2025. Not exactly a tourism poster." As they were finishing their meal, David's phone rang. He checked the screen and frowned. "Sorry, I need to take this." He stepped outside to answer, leaving Sophia in the diner. Martha approached the table with a coffee pot. "Refill, hun?" Sophia nodded, and Martha filled her cup. "David's a good man," Martha said conversationally, glancing out the window where David was pacing as he talked on the phone. "One of the last of his kind around here. Stubborn as a mule, proud as a peacock, but heart of gold." "How long have you known him?" Sophia asked. Martha laughed. "All my life. We went to school together. I was a year behind him. He was the star quarterback, you know. Could have played college ball, had offers and everything. Stayed here instead. Took over the farm when his father got sick. Never complained about it once." Sophia looked out at David, seeing him in a new light. "He didn't mention that." "He wouldn't," Martha said fondly. "David doesn't talk about himself much. Never has. But everyone in town knows what he's going through with the farm. We're all rooting for him, but—" She trailed off, her expression somber. "But what?" Martha sighed. "Times change. My grandparents were farmers too. Had to sell in the 80s, during the farm crisis. It nearly broke them. I'm afraid David's heading for the same heartbreak, fighting a battle he can't win." Before Sophia could respond, David returned, his expression grim. "We need to go," he said tightly. "There's a problem at the farm." He paid for their lunch quickly, and they hurried back to the truck. As they drove, David explained. "That was my neighbor, Frank Bradley. He spotted smoke coming from my property. Probably nothing could be a controlled burn on the next property over, but I need to check." But as they approached the Hayes farm, it became clear this wasn't a false alarm. Black smoke was rising from the direction of the barn, and as they turned down the driveway, they could see flames. "No, no, no, no," David muttered, accelerating hard. The truck bounced over the rutted drive as he pushed it to its limits. As soon as they reached the farmyard, David was out of the truck, running toward the barn. "Animals!" he shouted. "We need to get them out." Sophia hesitated only briefly before following him. The barn's southern wall was engulfed in flames, the ancient wood providing perfect fuel for the fire. Inside, they could hear the panicked sounds of the cows. David disappeared into the smoke-filled structure without hesitation. Sophia pulled her shirt over her nose and mouth and followed. The heat was intense, the smoke disorienting. She could make out David's figure, already leading one of the frightened cows toward the exit. "Get that one," he shouted. pointing to another cow huddled in a corner. "Just grab her halter and pull. She'll follow." For the next frantic minutes, they worked to evacuate the animals. The two elderly horses were the most difficult, terrified by the flames and reluctant to move. By the time they got the last animals to safety, the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. David stood in the farmyard, soot-streaked and coughing, counting the animals to ensure none had been left behind. Sophia realized her camera was still in her bag, still recording. Almost instinctively, she pulled it out, capturing the scene, the burning barn, the frightened animals, and David's desperate determination. The volunteer fire department from Willow Creek arrived, along with neighbors who had seen the smoke. They formed a bucket brigade from the well to supplement the fire truck's water supply. David worked alongside them, refusing to rest even as others urged him to sit down, to catch his breath. It took hours to bring the blaze under control. By then, the barn was a total loss. The structure that had stood for over a century was now a charred skeleton, still smoldering in the afternoon sun. As the adrenaline wore off, David sat heavily on an overturned bucket, his face blank with shock. Neighbors came by, offering condolences, promises of help with rebuilding. Sophia recorded some of these interactions from a respectful distance, capturing the community's response to tragedy. Finally, when most people had left and the fire chief had given final instructions about watching for flare-ups, David and Sophia were alone again in the farmyard. The rescued animals had been temporarily housed in a paddock, but the farm's infrastructure had been dealt a devastating blow. "The insurance won't cover it," David said dully, speaking for the first time in hours. "Policy lapsed last month. I had to choose between premium payments and feed for the animals." He laughed bitterly. Some choice that turned out to be. Sophia sat beside him, not sure what to say. Her camera was off now, tucked away in her bag. "I should have been here," David continued, his voice raw with emotion. "If I'd been here, I might have caught it earlier, before it spread." "This isn't your fault," Sophia said quietly. "And you saved the animals, that's what matters." David ran his hands through his hair, leaving streaks of soot. "Without the barn, I can't house the dairy operation. Without the dairy operation, I can't make payments. Without payments—" He trailed off, the implication clear. "What will you do?" Sophia asked. David stared at the smoldering ruins for a long moment. "Only thing I can do. Keep going." He stood up, his shoulders straightening with visible effort. "We'll figure something out. We always do." But the strain in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. This might be the final blow that the Hayes family farm couldn't recover from. Later that evening, after David had made temporary arrangements for the animals and showered away the soot and smoke, Sophia approached him carefully. "I got some footage today," she said. "Of the fire, the rescue, the community response? It's powerful stuff." David looked at her blankly. "The documentary. Right. I'd almost forgotten about that. I understand if you want me to delete it. It was an invasive thing to do, recording at a moment like that." To her surprise, David shook his head. "No, keep it. If my farm's going down in flames, literally and figuratively, might as well document it. Maybe someone will learn something from my mistakes." "That's not why I'm doing this," Sophia said earnestly. "I don't see failure when I look at you or this farm. I see resilience, determination, values worth preserving." David gave her a skeptical look. "Pretty words, but they don't rebuild barns or pay bank loans." "No," Sophia agreed. "But what if the documentary could help with that?" "What do you mean?" Sophia hesitated, not wanting to offer false hope. "I've been thinking about this all day. What if we launched a crowdfunding campaign alongside the documentary project? Share your story, the farm's history, the challenges you're facing. Ask for help rebuilding." David's pride visibly bristled. "Charity? That's your solution?" "Not charity," Sophia countered. "Investment. In sustainable farming, in preserving agricultural heritage, and keeping rural communities alive. People care about these issues, David. They just don't know how to help. We could show them. We could show them." David stood and paced the kitchen, clearly conflicted. "I've never taken handouts. Not once in my life. Is it a handout when neighbors help rebuild a barn? when a community comes together after a disaster? Sophia challenged. This would just be extending that circle of community beyond Willow Creek. David didn't respond immediately. He walked to the window, looking out at his land in the fading light. Finally, he turned back to her. What exactly would this involve? Over the next days, between salvaging what they could from the barn ruins and continuing to care for the animals, David and Sophia developed a plan. They would create a short, powerful mini-documentary about Hayes family farm, its history, its current challenges, and David's vision for its future. This would be the centerpiece of a crowdfunding campaign aimed at raising enough money to rebuild the barn and implement some of the modernizations David had dreamed of. Sophia spent hours filming additional footage. David working with the animals at dawn, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite his exhaustion. Panoramic shots of the land, showing both its beauty and its struggle with drought. Interviews with townspeople about the importance of family farms to the community. One evening, as they reviewed some of the footage on Sophia's laptop at the kitchen table, David looked thoughtful. You really think people will care about some farmer they've never met? I know they will, Sophia said confidently. Your story connects to something universal, something people are hungry for, even if they don't know it. Authenticity, perseverance, a connection to the land. David seemed unconvinced. Even if you're right, how much could a crowdfunding campaign possibly raise? I need at least $100,000 to rebuild the barn properly, not to mention the irrigation system upgrades. Sophia pulled up some examples on her laptop. This urban farm in Detroit raised $220,000 for greenhouses. This family ranch in Montana got $175,000 for Bria. Sustainable grazing infrastructure. It's not guaranteed, of course, but with the right story and the right campaign, cash. She trailed off, letting the possibilities hang in the air. And what's in it for you? David asked bluntly. Why are you so invested in saving my farm? It's the story I've been looking for, Sophia replied honestly. Not just a documentary about problems, but about solutions. About how communities can come together in the digital age to preserve something valuable that market forces alone would destroy. She met his eyes steadily. And yes, if it succeeds, it would be good for my career. I won't pretend otherwise. But that doesn't mean I don't also care about what happens to you and this farm. David nodded slowly. Fair enough. Mutual benefit. I can live with that. He extended his hand. Partners then? Partners, Sophia agreed, shaking his hand firmly. The next day, Sophia called in some favors from colleagues in New York. A composer friend agreed to create an original score for the mini-documentary. A web designer offered to build a simple but effective campaign page. A public relations consultant provided advice on maximizing impact. Meanwhile, David reached out to Lily at college, finally telling her the full truth about the farm's situation and the fire. He'd expected panic or disappointment. Instead, she immediately offered to come home. Finals are almost over anyway, she insisted over the phone. I can study here just as well as there. And you need the help, Dad, whether you'll admit it or not. 2 days later, Lily Hayes arrived, bringing with her an energy and determination that transformed the atmosphere on the farm. Where David had been grimly putting one foot in front of the other, Lily brought strategic thinking and contagious optimism. At 21, she was a striking young woman, with her father's steady gaze and her late mother's warm smile. She greeted Sophia with immediate, uncomplicated friendliness, excited about the documentary project and full of ideas for the campaign. We should emphasize the sustainability angle, she suggested as they sat around the kitchen table that first evening. My agricultural science professors are always talking about how family farms are essential to developing resilient food systems. And we should highlight the heritage aspects too, the fact that this land has been farmed by the same family for over 150 years. End quote. Sophia was impressed by Lily's grasp of messaging and her practical knowledge. You've really been preparing to take over this place someday, haven't you? Lily nodded firmly. Since I was 10 years old. That's not changing because of one fire or one bad drought. She turned to her father. Actually, I've been working on something at school that might help. A partnership with the Agricultural Extension Program. They're looking for test sites for new drought-resistant crop varieties. David raised an eyebrow. Test sites? You mean experimental crops? With grants to cover the implementation, Lily explained. It wouldn't solve all our problems, but it could provide some income and expertise. I've already talked to my advisor about nominating our farm. David looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. When did you grow up so much? He asked softly. Lily rolled her eyes, but her smile was affectionate. Someone had to, while you were busy being stubborn and self-sufficient. With Lily's input, the mini-documentary took on new dimensions. She showed Sophia the farm's historical records, carefully preserved in the farmhouse's small library. There were sepia photographs of Jacob Hayes standing proudly before the original homestead, ledgers recording harvests from the 1870s, letters from the Dust Bowl era describing the Saw, family's refusal to abandon their land when so many others fled west. This isn't just a business, Lily explained, as Sophia filmed her going through the family archives. It's a continuing dialogue between generations, between humans and the land. Every decision we make is informed by what came before and what comes after. Sophia captured this sentiment beautifully in her filming, contrasting historical photographs with present-day footage, showing how the land had changed and how it had remained the same. She filmed Lily and David walking the property together, pointing out features and discussing future plans with a shared vocabulary and understanding that spoke of deep family bonds. A week after her arrival, Lily accompanied Sophia into Willow Creek for additional interviews. In the town's small historical society, they discovered newspaper clippings about the Hayes farm winning agricultural prizes in the 1950s, about David's father serving on the school board, about David himself turning down college football scholarships to take over the farm when his father fell ill. I never knew about the scholarships, Lily said quietly as they left the historical society. He never mentioned it. He doesn't talk much about his sacrifices, Sophia observed. But others do. Everyone I've interviewed in town has a story about how your father helped them at some point. They had lunch at the Willow Creek Diner, where Martha fussed over Lily and reminisced about when she used to come in as a child, always ordering chocolate pie with a double scoop of ice cream. Your dad would pretend to scold you for ruining your appetite, Martha recalled fondly. But then, he'd order the same thing for himself. After lunch, they stopped by the local high school, where the agriculture teacher, Mr. Reeves, spoke passionately about David's contributions to the school's 4-H program. He's mentored dozens of students over the years, Mr. Reeves told Sophia's camera, taught them about responsible animal husbandry, sustainable farming practices, the value of hard work. Some of those kids had no other positive male role models in their lives. Can't put a price tag on that kind of community contribution. As they drove back to the farm, Lily was thoughtful. I knew Dad was respected in town, but I never realized how many lives he's touched. That's what makes this story so powerful, Sophia said. It's not just about saving one farm. It's about recognizing the value of people like your father, the invisible threads that hold rural communities together. While Sophia and Lily gathered these community perspectives, David was focusing on the practical aspects of recovery. He met with contractors about barn rebuilding costs, researched more efficient dairy equipment, and explored options for upgrading the irrigation system. The bank remained unwilling to extend additional credit, but at least one loan officer had expressed interest in revisiting the discussion if the crowdfunding campaign showed significant support. By the end of the second week, Sophia had enough footage to begin editing the mini-documentary. She set up her equipment in the farmhouse's dining room, turning it into a temporary studio. David and Lily continued with farm work, but they would stop by periodically to review footage or answer questions. As Sophia assembled the narrative, a compelling story emerged. It wasn't just about the struggles of one family farm, but about the changing face of rural America, the tensions between tradition and innovation, the vital importance of sustainable agriculture in an era of climate change. David's personal journey from a young man who sacrificed his own opportunities to preserve his family's legacy to a father now fighting to ensure that legacy could continue to the next generation, formed the emotional heart of the film. 3 weeks after the fire, the mini-documentary was complete. Sophia, David, and Lily gathered in the dining room to watch the final cut. For 20 powerful minutes, the Hayes family farm filled the screen. Its past, its present, its uncertain future. The score, contributed by Sophia's composer friend, underscored the emotional beats perfectly. The final shot, a drone camera slowly rising to show the Hayes land stretching to the horizon, faded to a simple text call to action for the crowdfunding campaign. When the screen went dark, there was silence in the room. David cleared his throat, clearly emotional. That's really something," he said finally. Lily wiped away tears. "It's perfect, Sophia. It shows exactly what this place means to us, why it's worth saving." "So we launch tomorrow?" Sophia asked, looking at both of them. "The campaign page is ready. My contacts in media and agriculture publications are primed to share it. We just need your final approval." David took a deep breath. It still feels strange, asking for help so publicly. But yes, let's do it. The next morning, they gathered around Sophia's laptop. With David's nod of confirmation, she hit the launch button on the campaign. The mini-documentary went live on multiple platforms simultaneously, along with the crowdfunding page that detailed specific needs and goals. $100, 000 for barn rebuilding, $50, 000 for irrigation system modernization, $25, 000 for updated dairy equipment. "Now we wait," Sophia said, closing the laptop. "And we spread the word through every channel we can." For the first few hours, response was modest, but encouraging. Neighbors and community members from Willow Creek were the first to contribute, often with small amounts, but heartfelt messages of support. By lunchtime, they had raised just over $5,000. "It's a start," David said, trying to sound optimistic. Then, shortly after noon, something unexpected happened. A popular agricultural blog picked up the story, praising the documentary's authentic portrayal of family farming and urging readers to support the campaign. An hour later, a climate activist with millions of social media followers shared it, framing the Hayes farm as an example of sustainable agriculture worth preserving. By dinner time, the campaign had reached $20,000 and was accelerating. Sophia's phone was constantly buzzing with notifications and messages from media contacts wanting more information. Lily took charge of responding to comments and messages on the campaign page, thanking donors and answering questions about the farm. David watched in stunned disbelief as the total continued to climb. "I never thought," he began, then shook his head, unable to complete the sentence. The next morning brought even more attention. A national news program featured a segment on the campaign, interviewing an agricultural economist about the importance of family farms in maintaining diverse, resilient food systems. A famous chef with a farm-to-table restaurant chain pledged a significant amount and encouraged others in the culinary world to support sustainable agriculture. By noon of the second day, they had surpassed $75,000. Lily was ecstatic, Sophia was professionally vindicated, and David was overwhelmed. He retreated to the porch, needing some space to process what was happening. Sophia found him there, staring out at his land with a complicated expression. "Everything okay?" she asked, sitting beside him on the swing. "It's just a lot," he admitted. "Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful. More grateful than I can say. But it's hard to accept that strangers care more about saving this farm than the bank that's known me for 20 years. People recognize something valuable that the market doesn't account for," Sophia said. "The intangibles, community value, environmental stewardship, agricultural heritage, things that don't show up on a balance sheet but matter deeply." David nodded slowly. "I've been doing this so long. Sometimes I forget why it matters so much to me, seeing it through your lens, through all these people's responses. It's like remembering something I always knew but couldn't articulate." By the end of the first week, the campaign had exceeded its initial goal of $175,000. Contributions continued to come in, along with messages of support from around the country and even internationally. The Hayes family farm had become a symbol and a larger conversation about the future of agriculture, the preservation of rural communities, and the kind of food system people wanted to support. Media requests began pouring in. Sophia, with her background in publicity, helped David and Lily navigate these opportunities strategically. They did select interviews with agricultural publications, regional news outlets, and programs focused on sustainability and rural issues. David, initially uncomfortable in front of cameras, gradually found his voice as a passionate advocate for family farming. As the campaign total approached $250,000, they revised their goals, outlining additional projects that could further enhance the farm's sustainability and profitability. Solar panels to reduce energy costs, a small processing facility for value-added products from the apple orchard, educational programs for school groups and aspiring young farmers. The bank, seeing the overwhelming public response, suddenly became much more cooperative. The loan officer who had repeatedly rejected David's applications now called with congratulations and offers of favorable terms for future needs. David accepted these overtures graciously, but Lily was less forgiving. "Funny how they discover we're creditworthy once other people show faith in us," she remarked after one such call. The crowdfunding campaign eventually closed at just over $300,000, far exceeding their most optimistic projections. But its impact extended beyond the financial. Agricultural Extension Services reached out with offers of technical assistance. A sustainable farming network invited David to join their board. A regional cooperative proposed a partnership for marketing the farm's products. For Sophia, the project represented a professional breakthrough. The mini-documentary won recognition at several film festivals focused on environmental and rural issues. More importantly, it opened doors for her to continue telling similar stories of rural resilience and innovation. She began planning a full-length documentary, expanding on the themes she'd explored with the Hayes farm, featuring other family farms finding creative ways to survive and thrive. Construction on the new barn began in early autumn. It was designed to honor the historical structure while incorporating modern efficiencies. Solar panels were installed on the south-facing roof, and the dairy equipment inside represented a significant upgrade from what had been lost in the fire. Work on the irrigation system improvements coincided with the harvest. The new system would use 30% less water while providing more consistent moisture to the crops, a crucial adaptation to the increasingly unpredictable climate patterns affecting the region. Lily took a semester off from her agricultural studies to oversee these projects, applying theoretical knowledge from her courses to practical challenges on the farm. She worked closely with contractors and agricultural specialists, often impressing them with her technical understanding and clear vision for the farm's future. David found himself in the unaccustomed role of spokesperson and advocate. He was invited to speak at agricultural conferences, to testify before state legislative committees on rural issues, and to mentor younger farmers facing similar challenges. Initially reluctant, he gradually embraced this new dimension of his identity, recognizing that his experiences could help others. Through it all, Sophia remained connected to the Hayes farm, visiting regularly to document the progress and maintain the relationship with David and Lily. What had begun as a chance encounter on a dusty road had evolved into a deep friendship and an ongoing collaboration. 1 year after the barn fire, the Hayes family farm hosted a community celebration to mark the completion of the major reconstruction and improvement projects. Hundreds of people attended, including neighbors, supporters from the crowdfunding campaign who lived within driving distance, and media representatives. The new barn stood proudly. Its traditional external appearance belying the modern, efficient systems within. The fields, benefiting from the improved irrigation, showed promising growth despite the continuing challenges of a changing climate. The apple orchard had been expanded with heritage varieties selected for disease resistance and drought tolerance. During the celebration, David, Lily, and Sophia stood together on the porch, observing the bustling activity in the farmyard. Children played games organized by 4-H members, local food vendors served dishes made with ingredients from area farms, and musicians performed on a small stage set up near the new barn. "Did you ever imagine this?" David asked Sophia. gesturing to the scene before them. "When you picked up that dusty hitchhiker on the road?" Sophia smiled. "I was looking for a story. I found something much more valuable." "A profitable documentary subject?" Lily teased. "A reminder of why stories matter," Sophia corrected gently. "They connect us. They help us see value in things we might otherwise overlook. They inspire action." The Hayes family farm had indeed inspired action. Beyond the direct support for their own operation, the campaign had sparked conversations in communities across rural America. Other family farms had launched similar initiatives, often with success. Agricultural policymakers were paying more attention to the unique needs and contributions of independent farmers. Consumers were becoming more conscious of where their food came from and who produced it. David put an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Your mother would be proud of what you've accomplished here," he said softly. "What we've accomplished," Lily corrected, including both her father and Sophia in her glance. "None of us could have done it alone." As the celebration continued into evening, with lanterns illuminating the farmyard and a harvest moon rising over the fields, the Hayes family farm stood as testament to the power of perseverance, community, and storytelling. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had transformed into a new chapter for the farm, for the Hayes family, and for Sophia's career. The story of the struggling farmer and the filmmaker Hitchhiker had resonated far beyond Willow Creek, touching lives and changing perspectives across the country. In sharing their journey, they had not only saved one family farm, but had contributed to a broader movement of rural revitalization and sustainable agriculture. As the guests began to depart, promising to return for next year's celebration, David stood at the edge of his property, looking out over land that his ancestors had farmed for generations. For the first time in years, he felt confident that this legacy would continue, that the seventh generation of Hayes farmers would indeed tend this soil. The path forward would not be without challenges: changing climate conditions, market fluctuations, the ongoing pressures of industrial agriculture. But they would face these challenges with new resources, new knowledge, and a newly discovered community of support. From the porch, Sophia captured one final image for her ongoing documentation of the farm's journey. David Hayes standing tall against the backdrop of his land, silhouetted by the setting sun, a living bridge between agricultural traditions of the past and sustainable farming practices of the future. It was an image of hope, resilience, and quiet determination, qualities that had always defined the American farmer, and that would be needed more than ever in the years to come. 6 months later, Sophia's full-length documentary, American Soil, premiered at a prestigious film festival. Building on her experience with the Hayes farm, she had traveled the country, documenting the stories of family farmers adapting to changing conditions, finding innovative solutions to preserve their way of life while embracing new technologies and approaches. David and Lily attended the premiere as honored guests. They watched with emotion as their story played out on the big screen, now woven into a larger narrative about the future of American agriculture. The audience response was overwhelmingly positive, with many viewers expressing newfound appreciation for the complex challenges facing rural communities and the crucial importance of supporting sustainable, independent farming. After the screening, during the Q session, a young film student asked Sophia about the origin of the project. "What made you decide to focus on this particular topic? It seems like such a departure from your previous urban-centered work." Sophia smiled, glancing at David and Lily seated in the front row. "Sometimes the most important stories find you when you least expect them," she replied. "I was looking for a ride on a dusty road, and I found a subject that changed my perspective on what matters in America today." She paused, then added, "And I discovered that the most powerful documentaries don't just observe, they participate. They connect people who might otherwise never find each other." The film went on to secure distribution with a major streaming service, ensuring that the stories it told would reach millions of viewers. The Hayes family farm, once on the brink of foreclosure, became known nationally as an example of rural resilience and innovation. Lily completed her agricultural science degree and returned full-time to the farm, implementing new sustainable practices and expanding their educational programs for aspiring farmers. David, while still actively involved in daily farm operations, embraced his unexpected role as an advocate for family farming. He spoke at conferences, advised policymakers, and mentored younger farmers facing the same challenges he had overcome. The quiet, proud man, who had once been reluctant to ask for help, now freely shared his knowledge and experience, recognizing that the future of American agriculture depended on collaboration rather than isolation. The relationship between the Hayes family and Sophia evolved into a lasting partnership. She continued to document the farm's journey, creating educational materials about sustainable agriculture and rural life that were used in schools across the country. What had begun as a chance encounter between a struggling farmer and a hitchhiking filmmaker had grown into a movement that touched countless lives and helped reshape the conversation about the future of farming in America. And it all started with a simple act of kindness on a hot summer day, a farmer giving a ride to a stranger on a dusty rural road. Neither of them aware that this small moment of connection would change not only their own lives, but the lives of many others. At the National Documentary Awards, standing on that gleaming stage with Sophia beside him, David Hayes finally opened the envelope. The room held its breath as he read the announcement, and the award for Outstanding Social Impact Documentary goes to American Soil by Sophia Reid. The audience erupted in applause as Sophia accepted the award. In her acceptance speech, she spoke eloquently about the power of documentary filmmaking to bridge divides, to make visible the invisible struggles and triumphs of everyday Americans, and to inspire concrete action toward a more sustainable and equitable future. This award belongs to every family farmer fighting to preserve a way of life that benefits us all, she concluded. And especially to David and Lily Hayes, who taught me that the most important stories aren't found in statistics or policy papers, but in the daily acts of courage and commitment that so often go unrecognized. As they left the stage together, David leaned close to whisper, "Not bad for a hitchhiker and a farmer who couldn't even get a bank loan." Sophia laughed. "Just imagine what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day." David shook his head, smiling. "Some things are just meant to be, I guess. Like 6 generations of Hayes farmers working the same soil. And now a 7th. Sophia reminded him, referring to Lily's recent announcement that the Hayes family farm would be launching an apprenticeship program for young farmers, ensuring that the knowledge and values of sustainable agriculture would be passed on beyond their own family. As they rejoined the celebration, surrounded by filmmakers, journalists, and agricultural advocates who had been inspired by their story, David reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 2 years. From the depths of potential failure to this moment of recognition and impact, it had been a transformation he could never have imagined when he picked up a dusty hitchhiker on that fateful summer day. The struggling farmer and the filmmaker Hitchhiker had indeed told his story to the world. But more importantly, they had helped write a new chapter for family farming in America, one of innovation, community support, and renewed appreciation for the men and women who tend the soil that feeds us all. It wasn't just David's story anymore. It had become part of a larger narrative about resilience, sustainability, and the enduring importance of connection in an increasingly fragmented world. And as for Hayes' family farm, it continued to flourish, not just as a business, but as a beacon of hope for rural communities across the country. The 7th generation was already learning to walk its fields, to know its seasons, to love its soil. The legacy would continue, strengthened by the challenges it had overcome and the new connections it had formed. In the end, that was all any farmer could ask for. The chance for the story of the land to continue, enriched by each generation that tended it with care and passed it on with hope. The dusty road that had brought David and Sophia together still stretched through Willow Creek, but it was no longer a path to nowhere. It had become a way forward, not just for one family farm, but for a vision of rural America where tradition and innovation worked in harmony, where the value of farming extended beyond balance sheets to encompass community, sustainability, and hope for the future. And all because a struggling farmer had stopped to give a ride to a hitchhiker, unaware that she would help tell his story to the world.